Hey, good morning. Good to see you. Today we're going to wrap up this series on identity crisis. And one of the things that we've been looking at this is how do we live and work and respond in a world where information is often reliable? How do we find reliable information? Because sometimes we find out later that this was misinformation. And if we make decisions in our life based off of misinformation, ultimately that's going to lead us towards chaos, perhaps a crisis, and it leaves us kind of questioning all kinds of stuff. But here's what happens. History always uncovers misinformation, right? Anyone here old enough to remember when Pluto used to be a planet? Excuse me, right? Remember, you were old enough for that. You remember when, some of you don't remember this, but I wasn't alive for this, when people said people will never fly, right? You'll never be able to fly. People are always meant to be on the ground. You'll never be able to get off the ground, all that kind of stuff, right? And then there was also, remember when cocaine was once thought to be healthy? It was like a miracle drug, and then they even put it in Coca-Cola. A CNN reporter, excuse me, Caleb Hellerman said this about cocaine. He said, long before drug cartels, crack wars, and TV shows about addiction, cocaine was promoted as a wonder drug, sold as a cure-all, and praised by some of the greatest minds in medical history, including Sigmund Freud, you know, who we're going to talk about later this morning as well, and the pioneering surgeon William Halsted. And we've been looking through the ancient story in Genesis. We've been looking through the ancient story of Genesis, the creation story in Genesis, and I'm not debating the genre or historicity, but rather what the story means. And I've been looking at what does this story mean? And for that, there's been some remarkable insight on how they do, because it begins to really highlight some things that are extremely true. Now, talking snakes, we said, we don't believe in that now, and I don't think the people that read this thousands of years ago also thought, oh, you know, snakes talk, watch out, this one's got something to say. That didn't happen either. So that's not where it was. We're looking at the story going, what does the story mean? What does it mean? And in this story, what we find is, who is God? Which is a story, that's a question that I have to answer. That's a story that you have to answer. Who is God? And the question is God going to be like the almighty God, the creator God, or are you playing that role in God and you're determining what's right or wrong in your life? Or is it Google determining what's right and wrong in your life? Or is it, you know, the news? Or is it a friend? Or is it like social media? That's where you go to have the ultimate authority of what's right or wrong in your life. But if it's God, then that ultimately means there are certain things that can be true and can't be true. And once you determine who the ultimate authority is in your life and what's true, then you can determine what's the best way to live. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to focus on this last question, who's God, who are you, but what's the best way to live? And when we look at this, we have to deal with reality versus unreality. And there's both reality and unreality out there in the world, and we've reflected on honestly our unbelievable, extraordinary capabilities of you and I as human beings, that we can hold reality and unreality in our minds at the exact same time. And we discovered how that's like both our greatest strength, which is we can dream and have visions and think about stuff that hasn't going to be, and we can help create that into fruition. But it also means that you and I can have conversations with someone else in our head, and the other person's not even a part of it, and we can make it real in our head. And it's one of our greatest strengths, but it also can become one of our weaknesses, because it gives us the potential to be deceived. And in being deceived, we actually can convince ourselves, no. This is true. And we can kind of have this, and we define reality. And sometimes when we begin to kind of play that over in our head, it can lead us in the wrong direction, but we don't even know, because in our minds we've decided this is the right way. So this morning I want to focus on this way of Jesus. And I'm going to propose that this is kind of the best way, because Jesus came as a teacher, not a politician, not a military leader. He came as a teacher, and he gave us an informational guide to helping us create mental maps to help establish reality in a world that will increasingly have this unreality factor that will begin to go. So I want to look at how Jesus begins I think it is his most famous teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. It's found in the Bible in Luke chapter 6, and we'll get there in just a second. And And when he begins to share these things in this message, it was disorienting to his audience in the same way that it's disorienting to us when we begin to read this as well. Because Jesus' teachings didn't match reality of the world in which his audience was living in. And so Jesus begins to come and he turns things upside down, but then it almost looks as if he turns it right side up. And when we begin to look at this, he looks at a new reality, a new lens for a way to live. And so in Jesus says this in Luke chapter 6, he says this, verse 20, Blessed are you if you're poor. To which that audience said the same thing that this audience right now is going. And when we've talked about this over the years, we've said, well, that's odd. What reality would I want to live in that's true? Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you. And at this point, you're really going, he's left the rails. He's off the farm. When they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man, rejoice in that day. Sure, that sounds great. Oh, and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven, for that is how their ancestors treated the prophets. And so in this tension between being blessed and reality, the reality of being blessed, Jesus is saying that if you're blessed, if you're poor, if you're hungry, if you're excluded, or if you're rejected, he's putting forth 4 values. He's putting 4 values out for being blessed. Weakness, sacrifice, maybe self-sacrifice, sorrow, and rejection. Then he paints a picture for unreality. These are just as juicy. 24, hold on, I got a page turn. 24, but woe to you who are rich, for you have already received your comfort. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you will go hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated false prophets. And false prophets told people what they wanted to hear. We do this a little bit differently. We like things on social media and conversations if it tells us what we want to hear. We unlike or dislike or unfollow if someone tells us something that we don't want to hear. And so under this category of woe is really what unreality is. And Jesus says unreality is power, comfort, success, and recognition. Now, let's just take a real quick minute. A lot of times I'll ask hypothetical questions and I'll say, hey, don't raise your hand, don't move a muscle, because then the person next to you is like going to know, right? Okay, but I think this one's safe, that we can all vote on this one appropriately. Which of these lists are more attractive? Now, before you respond, remember, we're in church, and lying is something we frown upon. Which one of these lists is more appealing to you? Well, duh. The woe list doesn't seem very woe-y, right? And so you look at this, no one feels bad if they have power. No one feels bad if you're comfortable. Nobody feels bad if you're successful. Nobody feels bad if you're famous, right? In some level, in some degree, in your work, in what you do as a family member, as a parent, you want those things. I mean, these are things that we're aspiring to be. Being non-dependent, right? Being secure, accomplished, celebrated. Even if it's somebody patting you on the back for a job well done, nobody aspires to the list on the left. People who are always having to sacrifice, right? Scrimp. People who always feel rejected. Nobody woke up this morning and said, man, I just hope I get marginalized today. Wouldn't that be great? Just be wonderful. Nobody is marginalized. I mean, you don't look at your family and your kids. Nobody has just marginalized me enough today. Everybody's just giving me too much praise. It's just knock it off. Let me just be, right? Nobody says that. Nobody wants to be canceled. And this is difficult to embrace because it's difficult to trust. This is a very difficult concept to trust because it's very difficult to embrace because we want to live our lives. And ultimately, we will choose to reject this because as we looked at last week, Blaise Pascal, the famous mathematician, also theologian, Blaise Pascal said it this way: people invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof. So you don't believe what you believe because of proofs. Now, some people you went on a truth quest. Most people aren't on a truth quest. You're on a what do I like quest. And how do I get the things that I like? And how do I find ideas and ideologies that support what I already want to believe? Blaise Pascal says this because most of us find what we believe and what are proof, not on proof, but on what we find attractive. And if we go back to that list that we just had up there, the left side of that list, that's not attractive. So it's going to be very difficult to invite that into our reality quotient. Because for most of us, and for sure our culture, but for most of us, we've latched onto two ideologies, and they become mainstream. And this is what our cultural norms have been. The first one is, be true to yourself. Be true to yourself, because if you're not true to yourself, nobody else will be true to yourself. This is the essence of what it means. What is your truth? And that became very popular. What's your truth? Don't worry about living by anybody else's standards or rules. You live according to your natural rules, your natural self. Well, how did that enter the mainstream? I did a little work on this. Maybe we should have had like a prize if someone could do this one. I didn't know the answer. I had to Google this. Anybody remember where this idea to be true to thine own self is? Be true to thine own self. Clue number one, it comes from a Shakespeare play, Hamlet. Does anyone know who says this in Hamlet? I didn't either. Google said it. Polonius. You know who Polonius was? Me neither. I Googled it. He was the counselor to villains in Hamlet. He was the counselor, Claudius. Hamlet actually presents him as the fool in the story. So the fool in the story, we've hitched our wagons to the fool in the story. The fool in the story has a flawed idea in an ancient play, and it says, which self should I be true to? Myself? Well, that's flawed. Here's why. Being true to myself, which self am I going to be true to? I got a multiple set of selves that I can be true to. I can be true to the fact, I love my wife, I love my kids, I want to be present when I get home. So am I true to that self? Or am I true to this self? After a long day, sometimes I want to escape on a TV and just, let everybody else sort out their own problems or disagreements. So which self should I be true to? Both are viable. Both are justifiable. If being true to myself is the goal. But here's what I've noticed. That shifts and it changes based off of what I want at that moment, what I need at that moment, what I think I need at that moment. It shifts, and this brings a bunch of dangerous and unhealthy things into play. The second popular ideology is this one. Follow your heart. It's a derivative of the first. And I think it's a part of a significant shift that took place. Charles Taylor talks about this in his book, A Secular Age. He talks about a shift from authority to one of authenticity. We used to live our lives off of authority, and now we've moved into authenticity. And it began in the 4th century. Authority began in the 4th century with a man named Augustine. Augustine is primarily responsible for the Judeo-Christian thinking that occurred, and one of our first really big thinkers that we had in the church. And Augustine said this in the 4th century. He said, the highest good, the highest value we can aspire to is pure love. So the highest authority that we have is pure love. He called that the highest good. Augustine thought the basic problem with humanity, he thought the biggest problem with humanity is that we either love the wrong things or we love the right things in the wrong order, which means we may have a priority issue, and if we could get our priorities right in our life, then we can live to the highest good, which is to love one another. And this grounded our society's thinking that we're going to live towards a value system and highest good until the last 100 years. 100 years ago, a guy named Sigmund Freud shows up, and he disagreed with Augustine. And Freud says the most important desire and highest good is your pleasure, your desire. Now, think of what you want changes if you're going for love and value versus what you want. Look at our culture, how it shifted. Look 100 years, 200 years ago, go back and read what people wanted for Christmas over 100 years ago. What do people want for Christmas now? What are the priorities of how people spend their money then, now? How we spend our time then, now, and you can see that what I desire has gone. Because Freud said the repression, God forbid, the repression of your desires is the basis for all neurosis and negative internal state. And the premise that came out of this is that he's saying the reason you're not happy is because you're not getting what you want. So psychological academia today says that it's not what's best for you because you don't even know what's best for you or the right things in the right way, as Augustine would say. And Freud shifted the thinking in our culture from a focus on order and value to I have to find my pleasure. And the best way to live suddenly became getting what I want or getting what we want, rather than us all wanting truly good things. So think of all the things you've done, purchased, or eaten out of pleasure recently. Do you choose the highest good when you go to the refrigerator? I got home last night decently late, and I was starving. I was hungry. Was I actually physically starving? No. I was just cold and wet from being outside for more hours than I can count. I just wanted to eat. So did I make a valued-based proposition? I started with an orange, and it steadily went down from there. Right? And it was a shift from an internal motivation to an external motivation in life. If life is all about the left best way to live, and my filter for that is let my heart be true, then that becomes my moral compass. And what does the Bible say? And we're going to look at this. What does the Bible say about the reality of your heart being your internal compass, the guiding principle of your life? Well, I felt like this. This is what it says, Jeremiah 17. Jeremiah 17, verse 9. The human heart is deceitful above all things beyond cure. Well, that's the Old Testament. What's the New Testament say? Well, the Apostle Paul in Philippians said, their destiny is destruction, their God is their stomach, and their glory is their shame. Their minds are set on earthly things. Does this sound familiar to you? Because we looked at this 2 weeks ago. We looked at this 2 weeks ago and we said, when we begin to question God as the ultimate authority in our life, here's what kind of takes place and shapes over time. When we go back to that story in the garden, the serpent thing did not tell Eve, God is a lunatic. He just questions reality. Did God really say to not eat this? And he creates a deceptive idea. And that deceptive idea can create destructive behavior, which ended up there, and we have distorted desires. And once we start to have self-talk that begins to head us in a certain direction, and that begins to play out into ideas and planning, and then we begin to find ourselves with destructive behaviors. And what happens in our life is we create chaos. We are in total and absolute chaos. And things that sounded good, things that may have felt good, turned out to be wrong because it led us not towards what we thought it was going to be. Eve took that bite, Adam took that bite, and they thought they were going to have all this knowledge and they were going to be like God and have all this knowledge and understanding, but that's not what happened. They found themselves in guilt and shame, hiding. And the relationships were all distorted at that moment. And so it's not that, when we think of things, it's not necessarily we think of things always morally, we think of things in validity. And so if you and I are told to follow our heart and be true to yourself, you can't go wrong, well, that's wrong. It can create some spectacular chaos. It's created chaos in my life when I've just been wrong. And the bottom line is you and I live out what we trust in. And the difference is a matter of who you decide to trust, which is challenging in a world with misinformation, because in the moment, do you want to take misinformation and live off of it, or do you want to take in factual information and live off of it, or true information? Well, nobody's going to pick misinformation. But that's not how we found out it works in the garden. It's a deceptive idea. Did God really say, don't eat, don't touch? Did he really say that? Because you and I both know that it looks pleasing to the eye. And if it looks pleasing, how can it be wrong? If it's right, are you trusting yourself, your reasoning, your intuition? And isn't it true your heart probably deceived you the last time you trusted it? Because you trusted in you. You were the ultimate authority in your life. And you brought into the idea that you could trust yourself more than you can trust God. And if you're honest, you probably let you down. And following Jesus and following your heart are two very different things. Because when you come to faith in Jesus, he makes you new. God accepts you the way that you are 100%. Absolutely. God accepts you the way that you are, and he loves you too much to allow you to stay that way. And that's why he sent Jesus as an informational guide to help you create new informational and mental maps about the way that you live, so that you begin to design your life the way that Jesus has kind of mapped it out for you to live your life. I mean, think about your natural self and your desires of your heart. We don't fantasize. Nobody in here fantasizes, I promise you. Nobody in here fantasizes about your weaknesses and how you can get worse at your weaknesses. Nobody does that. Nobody fantasizes how to sacrifice. Nobody fantasizes how you can just hit sorrow. Nobody fantasizes rejection. We strive for power, control, success, comfort, recognition, and Jesus says, whoa, which is a word, a really short word to say warning, 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 warning. If you choose after these things, which is all of us, including myself, you have to be aware. And he says, here's the thing. The other way to live is not natural, it's not intuitive, and your heart certainly is not going to lead you in that direction. But he says this to his audience, and his audience looks at him the same way you're looking at me. He says, but it's actually a better way to live. And so the Sermon on the Mount is disorienting at first, but when we look at it, you see how beautiful and how it's a better way to live in your relationships. Isn't this true? Because powering up or creating fear in others pushes people away. But when you create an environment where you open up and are honest, isn't it true? It's non-threatening and it draws people in. As a parent, what do you want for your kids? Because comfort breeds complacency. Oh, and entitlement. Don't forget that. Right? Sacrifice fosters gratitude and a strong work ethic. When you think of success, the world's definition lacks meaning, right? It just lacks meaning. It just means more than what you're doing or better or, making more money than you did last year. And so that's what success is. Sorrow is an extraordinary measure of meaning. What are you getting at, Paul? When you have something and you lose it, the degree to which you're sad is the degree to which you valued it. So asking the question, what breaks my heart or what has broken my heart, leads you to the answers of meaning and purpose. And aren't we all tired of people doing, I know we just started another election cycle with president, but aren't you already tired? So tired of doing what's popular to get voted. Like, I'm so tired of people valuing their life where popularity is the number one thing they're trying to do. It's just exhausting. They're trying to do whatever it takes to get promoted or to get the most followers or to get recognized versus doing what's right regardless of the cost. And we think of faith as something like for religious people. I get that, I understand that. But it's not. All people live by faith, not just religious people. There's a measure of faith that it requires for you, right? To have faith in something is simply to live as if it's true. You're living as if this is true. The question is not, do you have faith? You all have faith, right? So who or what do you have your faith in? And this is why Jesus came as an informational guide to really help people to put their trust in him, which is him. So the question is still the same. Who is God? Who are you? Who am I? And what's the best way to live? And you can live as God is the ultimate authority of your life on what is true about these questions. You have a freedom of choice, trust me. But if you choose not to, you will live a very limited reality based off of what you define as what a fullness of life experience can mean. And you'll operate your life as if God doesn't exist, but he's actually given us everything when it's factored into our life. So how do these questions of who is God, who am I, and what's the best way to live? Would you consider, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to consider pursuing God in your life as the ultimate authority in your life. The Apostle Paul said, to him who is able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. He's the one who can create a reality in our mind far more than we can if we give him our loyalty and we give him our trust. Jesus can lead those who put their trust in him to infinite joy, peace, hope, purpose, and meaning. But when pleasure was substituted as the highest good, when desire was substituted as the highest good, love had an identity crisis. And the result, we had a hard time understanding Jesus' perfect love. And Jesus' perfect love invites us to be, and some of you are wearing bracelets now, and if you don't, you can grab one here in just a second, that say made for more. Because when Jesus came into the world, he says you were made for more. You were made for more love. You were made for more joy, more peace, more patience, more kindness, more goodness, more gentleness, and more self-control. But you will not get there. Power, control, strength. You need to spend some time on the other side of the list. And I know it's intuitive. Jesus says, I know it's intuitive, but it will change your life. And it did. And history always has a way of rooting out misinformation. And the Sermon on the Mount has stood for over 2,000 years as the greatest piece of informational advice the world has ever known. So today I want to pray for you, and we're going to sing. And today we're going to sing two songs. We're going to sing two because I want to give you an opportunity. Sometimes it's a little too quick, and I just want to be real sensitive and patient on this today. I want you to think about who is your God? Like, really, who is your God? Like, who's the ultimate authority in your life? Who's the one who you, like, what's the filter you use through what the decisions you make about your life, and what's the scorecard in your life to know if you're winning at life? And so today, maybe you want to go and you want to respond, and you want to light a candle and go, God, there has been some dark stuff in my life, and I don't even know how I got there. I bought into a whole system that just led me to a place where it's not what I thought it was. I was misinformed. I didn't know it. Maybe you go, God, I need to light a candle, and just say, God, I need your light. I need light to a path back to you. Maybe today you need to pray, and you need to write a prayer request out and pin it to the cross and say, Jesus, I just surrender, I submit. I bought into some misinformation. I thought it was great. It's created chaos. It's created chaos at home, work, friendships. Maybe today you want to take communion, bring that back to your seat, and take the body and the bread and go, I've dismembered everything. Jesus, I need to pause and remember, put you back together in my life. Communion's a way to do that. Or maybe you want to go find a bucket and grab a bracelet, so every day, moment by moment, you can be reminded that you were made for more than strength, power, and control. You were made for more than that. So can I pray, and then we're going to sing. Father, today, there's so many times we get duped. I've been duped. Where we think, and I've thought, I know what I'm doing. It's okay. It's okay. I know what I'm doing. It's okay. This has to be true. My heart told me, oof. It's my truth. Boy. Jesus, I just want to confess that. And I just don't want to say that you're the highest authority in my life. I want to live and make decisions and choices as if you're the highest authority in my life, because you are, because that's what you've asked us to do. And with that, that means my values and priorities are going to be inverted. And I'm going to have to spend some time in my sorrows and weaknesses. And you said if I do that, then I will begin to be blessed. Somehow I always equate that if I'm blessed, then I get to go to the right side list. But being blessed means that I know who I am. And I know who you are. And I know what my purpose is. And you have made me for more than how many dollars I make, what my sales quota were, if I'm a good parent or not. You've made me for more than that. So Jesus, this morning we want to respond to you, and we want to sing songs to you and about you, and we just want to be involved in your presence this morning through singing and prayer. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks so much for joining us this week. If you're ready to take your next step, I would encourage you to text GP Next Step to 97000. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next Sunday.